Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to the STP training webinar series. The topic for which today is buy versus build. 5 things to consider when implementing a mobile device cloud. Our speaker for the day is Steve Orlando. I'm Smita Mishra, a professional tester myself. I am also a sustainability enthusiast these days. And I'm very excited to host you all and Steve Orlando today on our STP webinars. Here's a quick piece of information for all of you on the webinar. We have our next conference, Spring 2020 STP Con, which is coming up on 30th, from March 30th to April 2nd at San Diego. So be on a lookout. We shall be publishing the program soon. For any queries with respect to speaking, sponsoring, attending, and team discounts, etc., just send an email to info@softwaretestpro.com. Also, as we are on the topic, let me quickly remind you, the call for papers is still open for the Spring 2020 until the next Friday, which is the 18th of October. And please do send in your proposals. Should you need help in mentoring, please reach out to us again at info@softwaretestpro.com. We have a pool of senior speakers who are always happy to support you on reviewing, especially if this is the first time you are proposing. You could also reach out to Speakeasy, who will partner you up with a mentor to fine-tune your abstracts. Also, let me quickly tell you, there is an upcoming webinar, Making Products That Matter, Value-Driven Development in Practice, which will be held on 23rd of October. The speaker is Marcel Quakernack, who is a QA, Agile, and DevOps consultant at Shell. In this talk, he will discuss how value-driven teams operate and build products that will actually get used. The link is up for you to register. Please do go for it. And if you are on Twitter, please share the conference and the call for papers information and also about this webinar with your followers and connections. You can add STP's Twitter handle to your tweets, which is @SoftwareTestPro. You can also note down the Twitter handle that our speaker today, Steve, prefers, which is @MobileLabsINC. And definitely add the hashtag STP webinar. All right, let's get started with the webinar today. Welcome, Steve. We are very excited to have you with us today. And let me quickly introduce you for all of us here. So Steve Orlando is the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Mobile Labs. He's a seasoned development and quality assurance professional with experience in testing and developing mobile, web, mainframe, CRM, and desktop applications. In his role as Senior Director of Product Marketing for Mobile Labs, Steve drives the design and implementation of the organization's mobile device cloud, GigaFox. That's a trademarked property. Now let's get started with the discussion on buy versus build, 5 things to consider when implementing a mobile device cloud. Steve, the floor is all yours. I'm sharing the screen for you.
All right, thank you. That was a great introduction. Welcome, everybody, to the webinar, 5 things to consider when implementing a mobile device cloud. So I am in product marketing now, and it's kind of a fun little story of how I got here and with Mobile Labs. I started my career as a tester after graduating college with a marketing degree simply because I wanted to get out of college as fast as possible. But I had a testing job lined up where I was able to also do some development with that. Opportunity came where I was able to do mobile automation for a telecom company back when flip phones were around, and we were testing games and activations, and before the smartphone and Apple really changed the game. So I was doing that for a few years, and someone came to me and says, "Hey, would you like to build an add-in for UFT for mobile?" And that sounded intriguing because I'd like to do development. And from there, Mobile Labs was formed. I've been there from the beginning of the company when we formed that. And now I get the privilege and opportunity to be back into the marketing role, being able to discuss and describe GigaFox to the market, which is our device cloud. I like to use Dilbert in my presentations because I think it's a fun way just to describe trends or things that are obvious in a fun way. And this little comic here really just describes how no one really wants to be in testing. You have a developer here gets moved to the quality assurance group, and he vows that he's going to do whatever he can to get back up, even taking a job as a secretary's assistant. But I think this illustrates how, with testing, especially with mobile, it's not necessarily the most perceived sexy job there is, but it is one of the most necessary jobs, especially with mobile, because of the challenges that we have. So quick agenda real quick. We're going to talk about the common mobile testing challenges. We'll talk about what's a mobile device cloud. Hopefully we'll figure out that you need a device cloud, and then we'll figure out the 5 things that you need to consider whether or not you're going to build or buy a device cloud for your organization. We'll put it all together, and then at the very end we'll do some questions. So mobile testing challenges, and I like to do this by common conversations that you've often hear. If you're in mobile testing, you'll see these quite a bit. And the first one is me asking Susan if she's seen the charging cable for the Samsung Galaxy S9, and well, that's USB-C. I only have a micro USB charging cable or an iPhone charging cable because my personal charging cable is an iPhone. But Susan says she put it back in the drawer with all the other cables, and it's not there. Someone must have taken it for their own device. Well, we'll have to buy another one. Meanwhile, the device that I have is dead. I can't charge and test it. Or I'm asking Luke if he's seen the iPhone XS. It's not in the testing drawer. Well, Luke is saying Chip has it. Did he bring it back to the office? And I'm realizing that Chip is out sick today, and he still has it. So how am I supposed to test the iPhone XS with the latest build for my testing? Can't get that done. And then this one is not necessarily related to only mobile testing, but it illustrates a point. And I'm asking Michael if he saw the bug that I submitted yesterday from testing, and Michael says, yeah, he can't reproduce it. Typical developer response in my scenario. I can show it to you again if you'd like. I used an Android 6 device. Well, Michael's saying, well, he only has an Android 9 device. Well, there we have it. We're not able to reproduce bugs because we don't all share the same device. Well, I'm offering to let him borrow the one I have so he can get the bug fixed, right? These illustrate common problems in that we've got what I've created as the mobile testing chaos equation, and that's challenges and accessibility of devices times the diversity of devices and testing gives you chaos. If we look at that, like accessibility challenges or devices missing or devices not charged, or someone has a device that's being used and I can't, or if you've followed Apple and understand Apple provisioning rules, then you might want to work for Apple because they don't understand Apple app provisioning rules for iOS. Those are challenges that you have to even be able to test. If you look at the diversity challenges of many operating systems, many manufacturers and form factors, there's over 20,000 Android operating system and device combinations in the world. If you think about that, that's quite a bit for you to figure out if you are working on every device, your apps work on every device. Well, now you multiply that by manual versus automated testing versus user acceptance versus performance types testing, right? All that leads to chaos, which is really lower productivity, poor DevOps and CI/CD practices, damages to your brand, and ultimately loss of business. Now, ultimately, what we want to do here is predict chaos. We can't eliminate any challenges in accessibility or diversity, but we can make them predictable. And that makes our chaos predictable, and it makes it much easier for us to figure out what is going to happen once we release our app to the world. So we did a survey this year, and operating system and device combinations was the #1 mobile testing challenges that there is out there. And so what we need to do is figure out a way that we can wrap our head around that so that we can ultimately figure out how to lower our diversity challenges. And really what we want to do is possibly look at monitoring what our end users are using. You can do that with various tools that can show that back in your production environments. And then you ultimately just pick the most popular devices that are in that pool of your customers. So Some organizations have internal apps and their sales team's only on Apple. That makes that easy. You can just test on Apple. But if your end user is a publicly available app, like if you're a bank and you're releasing that to your customers, you've got different things to consider when you're releasing that, tablets, phones, and things like that. But you want to pick the most commonly used. You don't want to focus on the 2% of devices out there. You want to focus on the ones that are in the 10s or 20%. So ultimately, we want to do is just lower our chaos in that. When we look at that, a mobile device is the test environment, right? It's much different than a laptop or computer, which are all always networked and online or running as virtual machines, and they're stable and you don't change them, right? On the device, it's got battery, it's got CPU, it runs on a device, it requires it to be tethered by USB cables, right? Whether it's an app or a website, it's all done that. And trying to manage the test environment, especially when it's mobile, is a challenge. You have to figure out, well, how do I know which level of operating system is on that device, whether or not it's charged up or who has it, what versions are installed, right? Most common thing I've seen out there is there's a drawer full of devices that someone manages with an Excel sheet, and they check in or check out and then go about their testing. And that works to some degree until the spreadsheet's out of date, or someone has gone sick and they've taken a device, or the device is never returned, but someone says they actually put it back in the drawer. When you have those challenges of managing the environment, just in an accessibility standpoint, it lowers your productivity. It lowers the amount of testing that you can do. If someone's late who has the key to the drawer and all the devices have been are powered off and they're not charged, then you're waiting an hour for someone to get that in when you could be testing, right? And then also, not only that, but you have to figure out how to sideload apps to your devices. It's not as easy as pushing software or just running an installer. You've got to figure out, well, do you need to tether it to iTunes? Do you need to use a tool like Hockey App or TestFlight? Those are different types of ways to get apps to the device as well. So what is a device cloud? And really what a device cloud is, it's a mobile test lab, right? It's a way for you to organize your testing devices into a testing lab, much like you've done with computers for the types of testing. And it's a system that provides the ability to manage the devices, right? So all the devices should be online. They should be available to testers and developers both, be able to be shared, right? And then also ability to access them. So you access them remotely as they're connected to the device cloud for both testing and development, and all the different types of testing you need for manual and automated as well. So we've come to the conclusion that I need a device cloud. And so really, what are my options? And that is build your own test lab. We've all done that before with computers and browsers and that in a test lab, where they're all networked together and you can run your tests against them. And they all have different various aspects and components of that. Or you can buy access to devices, and buy usually means subscription, or we're going to a vendor to provide this as a service in that sense. So we got 5 questions here that we want to ask, right? Do you have budget, or do I have budget to build or for a device cloud? Do I have the resources to build a device cloud? How important is manual testing to my project? What are my security requirements? And what's the skill level of my testing team? And so the first question we have to ask is budget. And I've been here with this, Dilbert. You've eliminated the budget for automated test software. How are we going to test our new code? Well, go write some automated test software. I already pay you, so it's free. So budget's important here. So the first question is, do I have money to spend? And usually the note, if you don't have money to spend, you have really 2 options, and that is you just keep going the way you're going, hope for the best, make sure that everything that you can take care of in your mobile testing challenges, you can try to figure out how to manage it as best as possible. Or you figure out a way for a business case to say yes, right? We want to go back to do that. Once you've come to that you can spend money, you need to figure out how much it'll cost and then calculate whether or not you can build or buy, and can you afford it. And according to our survey, budget for Device Testing Cloud was actually not a major factor. Limited budget is not a major factor to getting your mobile testing projects done. Only 22% of respondents said that they have budget problems. But we have different things that fall into the budget buckets, right? So typically people and salaries are not considered into that. So they don't fall into the tool and subscriptions budget, right? So if you want to build that hardware and all that, you usually don't have to take into consideration the people and salaries. And then if you are someone who has dealt with budget before, you have to worry about CapEx and OpEx, and that really just matters how the money falls out of your budget and whether or not you can capitalize and depreciate assets in the sense. So there's different rules for the types of budgets that you might have to consider as well. So you can't develop an automated test system by the arbitrary deadline. Try working smarter, not harder, with a sense of urgency and a bias for action. So what's required to build a device cloud? And if we look back at what we did with testing browsers in our old test labs, we had computers and we had an operating system that was pretty stable. We only had to test changes from XP to Windows 7. We skipped Vista. And then you go from 7 to 10 or 7 to 8 and then 8 to 10. But you only had to do that really once. We don't have that to worry about with in a device lab. We have to worry about different devices. So we need devices to build that. We need computers to hook the devices up to. You need USB hubs depending on the number of devices you want to hook up to the computers or the amount of computers you have. And you need software to pull it all together. And it's really software to connect the nodes and devices together. You need software to run the automation. You need software to generate your test results and test reports. You need software to connect to test management and defect tracking systems, access to those devices and logs, and software to ultimately store the source code of all your tests. So you need those things to build a device cloud. But if you're going with a buying option for a device cloud or going with the vendor, there's two main things that you want to consider. And that is whether or not you're going to use shared devices, which are available as a public offering, meaning that you access the device that's available. When you're done with it, it's wiped and used, and someone else can access it, but someone from another company can access the same devices. They're all part of the shared pool by the vendor. Typically, in this scenario, you're paying by amount of time or amount of parallel tests for access, and they're usually always in a hosted environment, hosted by the vendor and their data center. So if you're looking for on-premises, you're not usually looking at shared devices. When you're looking at private dedicated devices, this is not shared with any other company. So tester A might use it for 5 minutes, and then tester B can come in and use that, but they're all part of the same team. You pay by the number of devices you want to access, not necessarily based on the number of time. And that's usually at a higher cost than the shared model. But these devices can be deployed on premises or they can be hosted by the vendor, right? So not only that, with budget, is you want to look at hidden costs in this. And there's different things about this maintenance, training, people, and time that you'll want to consider in your build or buy scenario. With maintenance, in a build scenario, you've got maintenance for hardware and device replacement and all the software that you have with that. If you go with a vendor, it's usually included with the subscription, right? You pay a maintenance fee or it's renewed as part of your subscription. There's training costs. If you build it, you need to be able to have and teach other people to run and maintain that, right? So you have to have time for someone to learn this. You want to make sure that if the person who built it leaves, that someone else can pick it up and use it. In a buy scenario, you should get onboarding as part of the subscription. So you should be able to pick this up fairly quickly or have the vendor help you get started. You've got the people cost, right? Whether or not you're going to build or dedicate people to keep this running, even if it's part-time, that is a cost associated with that person's time, whether or not they're going to be testing or not. And the same in a buy scenario, you have the administration cost, right? The amount of time it takes to administer the users and devices on that system. And then the time it takes to put it together in a build scenario versus the time that it takes to implement in a buy scenario. Usually in the vendor scenario, you can get it going instantly or within a day or two, depending on access to your environments. So there's things you want to talk and think about with budget. But in addition to that, you want to look at, do you have resources to build a device cloud, right? And when I say resources, I'm referring to software, hardware, people, and time. Again, Dilbert points this out. I made a typo in my annual budget request. Don't worry, there are only two things you can't buy for the test lab this year, hardware and software. If we look at time here, and I'll reference our survey again, nearly half of the people, which is the third biggest challenge to mobile implementations and testing, is time. Not enough time to test, right? And that goes regardless of whether or not you have a cloud or you're going to build it. But if we look at time, we have to look at, in a build scenario, it's going to take longer time to get the device cloud running. You need to, and then if you look at that time, you need to determine if spending time on building the device cloud will impact the testing efforts underway. If you can dedicate people, and we go to people next, if you can dedicate people to that, obviously you can get it built faster, but is that going to be a detriment to your testing? In a buy scenario, less time to implement. It's working with the vendor to make sure that it implements into your processes. So it should take less time to build. And in our survey, the second biggest challenge was people, right? The first one was operating system device combination. So having enough people to test for mobile is a challenge. And in a build scenario, you have to figure out, can you dedicate a person or team to build and maintain? And if you can't, you have to choose what gets delayed, the device cloud or the testing. That's not necessarily an easy decision. The device cloud might get you the ability to deliver faster, but you might have really demanding testing projects going on at the time that you can't dedicate to that. So you have to weigh those options of people and time in the build scenario. In the buy scenario, you have to look at who can administer users and devices, and figure out which team or group or users are going to be the ones to implement the administration of the tool and solution. If you're hardware and software, you need to look at whether or not you have devices and computers and USB hubs already available. A lot of that time it's much easier to get. It doesn't necessarily always hit your budget. So that might make it more attractive to that. But if you look at software, you need to figure out which software you need. Do you have access to open source or commercial software and that? And I will say, if we look at Appium for automation, which is the #1 testing tool for mobile right now, well over 70% of our survey users are using Appium, which is a dramatic shift from old tools like UFT in the past. But they make it easy because they have tools that allow you to take tethered devices and run Appium tests against them. And because it's based on Selenium, it can integrate with your existing Selenium grid. So you can easily, using a Selenium grid and Appium, network all of these devices together in a pool to run your automation from a single place. So that's a great starting point in building that. But do you have access? Do you have the ability to run Appium? Do you have expertise to run that? Do you have time to implement it? Or commercial tools, if you've got the Micro Focus suite, they've got built test tools that help automate and integrate everything. So if you're integrated with UFT, or you're integrated with Tricentis, those types of things, all that stuff works and pulls together. So it makes it easy to build out your test environment. In a buy scenario for hardware and software, that's all part of it, right? It's usually software. In that, if you're doing on-premises, you're usually looking at some hardware, but it should all be included by the vendor as part of the subscription. So the next question that we want to talk about is, how important is manual testing to my project? And if I look at what's out there and what people have talked to me, and based on our survey, only 23% of our customers are doing more automation than manual testing, which leaves over 70% are doing more manual testing than automation. So we need to look at that in a scenario. You simply can't get rid of manual testing simply because an automated test can't tell you whether or not your app's going to get 5-star reviews or whether or not it meets the business case. It can be functionally perfect and still get 2 stars or 1 star because it didn't ultimately meet the business case and requirements, right? There's user experience as part of that, and we can automate to a degree, but we still have to run through because if it's not good to use, then it's not going to be used and you're going to lose brand business. So we have to look at how important this is for manual testing. And in a build scenario, you're probably only going to focus on automated testing because giving access to devices remotely yourselves, trying to build that software out, is very difficult. And I think it's too much of a project to take on for organization. So if manual testing is super important to you, I would go with a buy scenario, right? It should be available through a browser, access to the device, as if it were in your hand, and then they're always online and available and not discharged or whatever for your testing. So what are my security requirements? And this is important because every conversation about mobile these days involves security team and the network team. And the first question that you have to ask is, does your security team allow the devices hosted in an environment that's not within the company firewall, right? Devices are networked differently. They're movable, they can be stolen much easier than a laptop or a desktop or things that are run in virtual environments. So the security team and the network team is going to be more protective of these types of devices in that sense. And the number one question is whether or not they'll allow you to have a hosted environment, right? If they do not, your decisions are either for you to purchase an on-premises solution with a vendor or to build a device cloud yourself. If they do allow it, right, the next thing you have to figure out is whether or not you can access the environments from your test environments from the hosted vendor. And that is the number one challenge for hosting in the vendor. It's critical for your success to be able to get your test environments accessed by the devices with the vendor, whether that's through site-to-site VPNs, firewall rules, proxies, proxy software you run on your computer. You need to figure out how to get the access to your devices. And then ultimately, what is the skill level of my test team? And I've run an automation team before. We've had really good skilled people, but we need to make sure that it's not just automation skills that we're looking for, right? In the build scenario, you've got to figure out whether or not you can have people that can document the process, people that are good at training others, right? You have to learn whether or not they understand source code and DevOps principles to put it into networking and build scenarios in that sense. And you need to figure out whether or not they know how to do and build out infrastructure, right? And integrate that into pipelines. All that's important in a build scenario. And some of that same skill is required in the buy scenario as well. You need to be able to hook them up to the CI/CD pipelines. You need to understand whether or not you have this in an automated build system, how your automated tests are run. But with a vendor, they should have integrations to make that much easier than having to build it and figure it out yourself, right? And managing and using the tool should be fairly simple. They should be able to pick it up fairly quickly. So if we put this all together, what are we looking at? We need a device cloud. People, time, and device operating system combinations make up the biggest mobile testing challenges. A device cloud helps you with that. with all those problems, centralizing devices, organizing and lowering your accessibility challenges, lowering your diversity challenges that you might have. You need a device cloud to test, quite frankly, with mobile. Trying to do this with tethered devices that you hand out and ship to different offices, or buying more devices, is just not a good enough solution. The ultimate goal is to have 5 stars in my app or my website, have it usable, have it work, and focusing on anything other than those things that make testing or take away from your testing focus is, quite frankly, hard to overcome if you don't. So if we look at this in implementing a device cloud, you have 2 knockout questions. If you don't have the right people to implement, go straight to the purchase option, go straight to a vendor, let them take on that burden, and make it easy for your team to solve those challenges and let the vendor tool provide that. And secondly, if you've got manual testing challenges, or if you're doing all manual testing still, go straight with the purchase option as well. The vendors provide access to devices, makes it much easier, takes off the management of that, and gives all the testers the ability to collaborate and share with devices. Now, narrowing questions that you have really ultimately is you have to look at your security. If it requires you to be behind the corporate firewall, then you've got an option to build or to go with on-premises. If you've got time constraints, lean towards implementing with a vendor. Vendors can implement within a day or 2 or a week and be functionally ready in production testing that week. But ultimately, look at your hidden costs with all of that. Look what it's going to take in terms of people, time, resources, software, hardware, all those things that you might look at for the hidden costs. While they may not be factoring decisions for budget, they should help guide you towards the right solution. And ultimately, if you don't have budget, anyways, take advantage of the cloud vendors' free trials. They should all have a free trial. Take advantage of that, help you build a business case so that you can figure out how to solve your mobile testing challenges. Some quick results are some results from us. All these are available on our website if you want to look at more. But through collaboration and through ability to centralize the mobile testing, we saved Simply Health a year of development time to implement their project because devices were shared between development and testing teams. Integration with automated tools and test management tools allowed them to quickly get their project up and running. If you look at a few of these other ones, it was about collaboration and reduced device management time that allowed them to move faster, right? We saved organizations money by not having to buy a lot of different types of devices, because if you look at it, a tester needs a device for 10 minutes for their test. But rather that, they were either dedicated a device, which costs a lot more money for that tester, or they had it for a few hours before it was returned. You can save time by allowing the next person to pick it up as soon as it becomes available from the other tester and on that. But the other benefit you get with a device cloud is the ability to run in parallel. So we helped an athletic apparel company decrease from 160-hour test run to 12 hours, simply because of the tool integrations that we had and the ability for them to move from single-threaded to running in parallel. They could get the job done overnight rather than wait an entire week for the test results to happen. So a little bit about Mobile Labs. We are the premier supplier of on-premises device clouds. We also do hosted. We have a device cloud for small teams all the way to large enterprise teams. We've been around for a while. Since 2011, we're here in Atlanta, Georgia. We're one of the original device cloud providers out there. And we can pretty much help anybody in any type of team or vertical, from customers in banking and finance, insurance, telecommunications, transportation, media, and gaming as well. So we can turn it over to Q&A. Here's some ways to contact me if you're interested as well. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. It was a great, insightful session. Let me quickly check for questions. So there is one here that says, what operating system does GigaFox support?
Yeah, so for us, we support anything from Android 5 and iOS 9.3 and later, including the latest and greatest of iOS 13 and Android 10. So we focus on the operating system. By doing so, we can pretty much support any type of device in GigaFox.
Okay.
And when
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, now that Apple has also updated different terminology, when I say iOS, I include iPad OS as well.
Will you be supporting UWP?
We do not at this time support UWP. Well, I believe that's Windows, right? Windows phones. We don't support Windows phones, but we support browsers. So if you're running a web type or hybrid type application, we can support those as well.
Thank you. The next question is, what do you see are the major challenges that we will face in mobile in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think it's still going to be the challenges in 3 to 5 years in the mobile technology as whether or not voice takes off. So integration with assistants might be a challenge, but I think the rapid deployment is still going to be the top challenge. So being able to become first to market, not wait on that, and integrating with that is going to be the biggest challenge. And I haven't seen that necessarily change in the last 5 years, so I predict that's going to be the same. If you're looking for new technology trends, like I said, voice is there. You're going to see a lot more with augmented reality. And then just from a tool standpoint, trying to get non-technical testers to be able to help automate, because I think that challenge is still great. If we can rapidly repeat some tasks in testing, we can save a lot of time and free up testers to make sure that the 5-star is good, and that whether or not testers are making sure that business objectives are met, rather than whether or not you can make a hotel reservation if you have a hotel app.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The next question is, how do you feel we should evolve the testing around responsive web design to ensure software functions work well on web browsers versus mobile browsers?
Yeah, you want to test that, and there's some new tools out there. So responsive web design is very tricky simply because you have different size devices, you've got different size browsers and resolutions, and the different browsers themselves, Safari, Chrome, Edge, IE, Firefox, all those that are out there. So what you want to do is you want to be able to make sure that you have an automated test suite to do regression. You want to cover different sizes. You want to test on some real devices. You want to test on and your browsers, right? So you want to change the browser size to help you test with that as well. And doing so, you're going to want to use tools that might also look at visual testing, right? Responsive is so hard because you never know at a certain size whether or not you're going to have overlapping elements. While it may functionally work with an automated test, you want to visually inspect that. And there is now visual automation capable. And you want to put it all together. So Selenium has always been the most popular for web. For a while, it's based on the standard. Appium is now based on that, and Appium can integrate with Selenium grids. So if you're going to build your test lab yourself, you want to use a Selenium grid. If not, you want to look at using various different types of tools that can help you look at browser versions and sizes and things like that.
Thank you. Another question is, how do you suggest or look at the use of mobile device cloud with respect to so many IoT devices coming up?
Yeah, so we've been able to help quite a few organizations with that. And it's a challenge because not every public cloud has access to, tether a device with different things like heart monitors and medical devices or smart lights, those types of things. So we've been able to help because we provide an on-premise lab, which can integrate with those types of devices in our customers' testing labs where they have that. So we've worked with a organization that tests smart lights, and we've got a camera that can point to the smart lights, and their offshore teams are actually driving those lights with tethered devices in a device cloud, and they can actually see what happens with the device, over a webcam, see what's going on, but while using our software to drive, the application on the device. So you can have those types of things. Now, if we're getting away from, if we're looking at, Watch OS or Android watches or Samsung watches, those are different things, and I think vendors will start integrating into those types of things as they become more popular. Same with, Roku devices and things like that.
One more question here. So pretty much on similar lines, but it says, mobile devices are doing so much more today, from traditional native apps to apps that function externally. For example, Apple Pay or starting your car, locking your car with an app. How do we test for those spaces where the test environment may be external as well as internal?
Yeah, that's a challenge. It's along the similar lines. You have to have the devices and whatever it's connecting to. You have to have connectivity in those things. But what you want to do is make sure that whatever your approach is, the access to the test environment is there. So if you're looking at remote starting of cars or things like that, if you're a car company, you want to have the device be able to communicate either cellular or whatever back to your test device. I don't think they're actually testing with real devices. I think they've mocked out a car from remote start and functions like that. But that's another option too. If I think about it, is mocking those services so that you can test them rather than have to actually test with the real device.
Okay. One last question. In fact, it's more like knowing your thoughts. So it says, what are your thoughts on automation via UFT for mobile apps, especially when you have a wide variety of apps and technologies to deal with outside of mobile?
So are we talking about unified functional testing from Micro Focus? Is that what the question is? Yeah,
yes.
We provide we provide an add-in for UFT specifically for those organizations who are still under the Micro Focus test suite. And the reason that we do that, well, one, that's where we started. We started with UFT. It was the most popular testing tool as of 3 years ago. But the suite that Micro Focus has provided with Quality Center, I guess now Octane, UFT, Performance Center, and Load Runner, all that stuff can be used together. So not only can you test your website with UFT, you can run it against your mobile with Mobile Labs. You can use that same UFT test case on mobile to run and see what the transactions are like on a real device as you're generating load against your servers that handle your mobile APIs. I mean, that suite is really good at making sure that you can cover the wide spectrum, even if you're only using Mobile Labs for a small portion of it.
Okay. Those will be all, Steve, for now, for the question and answers. Okay. So thank you again. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll probably send you, if there are any more questions which come to us, we'll just send them directly to you. Yeah. All right, so thank you so much again. It was very insightful session on mobile device labs, and especially for testers. So I'm sure our attendees found it very informative and useful. So thank you again, and I hope to see you at STPCon soon.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, guys.
All right, everyone. This concludes our webinar for today, and thank you everyone for joining. And more importantly, thank you for being engaging and making the most of the webinar for yourself and for the whole group. If you want to see more such sessions and more sessions on testing and wish to learn about testing, do join us at STPCon Spring 2020. The program will be announced soon. Stay on a lookout at stpcon.com. If you have queries on registrations, do email them at info@softwaretestpro.com. Also, let me remind you again, the call for papers is still open for the spring 2020 until the next Friday, which is the 18th of October. Please do send in your proposals and definitely do not shy away from asking for help if this is your first time for proposing a paper. And please do reach out to us at info@softwaretestpro.com. We have a pool of senior testers for you who are going to be really happy to support you for your abstract review. Stay tuned for more webinars and online trainings coming soon at softwaretestpro.com. We have an upcoming webinar, which is Making Products That Matter, Value-Driven Development in Practice on 23rd of October. The speaker is Marcel Walker-Nack, who is a QA, Agile, and DevOps consultant at Shell. In this talk, he will discuss how value-driven teams operate and build products that will actually get used. If the topic interests you, please do sign up for the same at softwaretestpro.com. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week ahead. See you all in San Diego in March next year. Keep practicing your testing.